Hello, we're back and we're covering Stoicism by way of Seneca. Okay, and so Stoicism is ancient philosophy that got started in Greece and ended up in Rome, and it's known as Hellenistic philosophy. And so it has a Greek and a Roman phase. So Seneca is Roman or was Roman, and he was born in 5 BC and died in 65 AD. So, in other words, he was alive during the time of Christ. He's a Stoic philosopher, writer, statesman, and also famously known as an advisor to the Emperor Nero, who was famous for fiddling while Rome burned. So Nero was known for his corruption and egoism, but Seneca was one of his advisors, and Seneca was not immune to Nero's problems and paranoias. As a matter of fact, he was ordered to commit suicide due to this, to Nero's paranoia that somehow Seneca was involved in a conspiracy to assassinate Nero, which wasn't true, but Seneca had to die as a result. And so when we're thinking about Stoic philosophy, the first thing that we need to get clear is that it's a rational philosophy. And so if we're thinking about it as a rational philosophy, we also understand that to be directed toward virtue. So in other words, it's rational, and at the same time, it is also ethical. So what we're reading of Seneca's On the Shortness of Life, so this letter on the shortness of life, which by the way is just an excerpt, it's not the whole thing. The whole thing is actually rather long. But when we're reading this, we're getting this sense that the way that we're understanding our lives is rational, and likewise, it's also ethical, okay? So, or it's virtuous, right? And so when we're thinking of our lives as rational and seeing that as extending to virtue, that's the basic idea behind a lot of what's implied in the letter, okay? So, in other words, in the letter on a shortness of life, we're urged to, and who was this letter to? I'm not really sure. I think that it was Seneca's father-in-law, something like that. But it was written in order to help get a better grasp of how to contend with life's shortness, okay, or the temporality, life's finitude. So in other words, it's often complained that life is too short, and what Seneca is pointing out is that life's shortness actually doesn't have much to do with its quality. So in other words, what we should really be doing, instead of complaining about the quantity of life that we're given, we should rather be emphasizing, by way of reason, our virtue toward a higher quality life. So in other words, to have a higher quality life is one that is rational, and one that is not overly concerned with that which we should be indifferent toward, okay? And so, in other words, death or mortality is something that is inevitable. It is not something, however, that we should invite, right? But yet, when we know it is a feature of life by way of being rational, in other words, being rational, so when we are rational, we're understanding that we're mortal creatures, right? And not only that, that as mortal creatures, we are given a length of time in which we are alive, okay? And so what's also implied here, so like for example, when I say we are given a length of time, What that means for the Stoic is that we are fated a length of time. For the Stoic, okay? So the Stoics believed in a providential way that nature is working. And so that providential way in which nature is working is living in accordance with nature's logic, okay? And so nature's logic is something that we're taking a part in by recognizing our own rational nature and understanding that we have a certain length of time that we're living on earth, a certain quantity of time is understood rationally, and it's also understood rationally that this is something that is already determined. And so what we're wanting to do as Stoics is live in harmony with that. So living in harmony with nature's providence is to be a better Stoic. In other words, it's to be a virtuous Stoic, okay? And so what that means is that there is the inevitability of death due to our status as moral creatures, right? And so that inevitability of death is something that we want to face with courage by way of understanding that we have a limited time on earth, okay? So what this does is it shows us that there's an emphasis on how we're living, okay? So in other words, students, when they step into a death and dying class, often think that we're going to talk a lot about an afterlife and is there an afterlife and such. And we forget, though, that contending with death in a rational way actually shows us that we should have an emphasis on the quality of life that we're leading, okay? And so see that as a Stoic principle that is brought about in the way that we are virtuous as a matter of choice, okay? So in other words, we have a decision to make in our life as to whether or not we want to handle the time that we have the time that we're given frivolously, by being shallow, by not seeking virtue, by seeking something other than virtue, wealth, fame, etc. And so when we are preoccupied with not being virtuous, we are not being good people for the Stoic. And so implied in all of that is choice. So in other words, we have a decision to face that which we should be indifferent toward, and what we should be indifferent toward are such things as our own mortality. Why should we be indifferent to that? Because we know that death is a fact, right? No, we shouldn't invite death, but we know that it's an inevitability that we'll eventually have to have courage facing. So we might as well have an emphasis on having a higher quality of life while we're living to be virtuous people as a matter of choice, okay? So in other words, you could see how rational cognition is implied, likewise how choice is implied, and likewise how the inevitability is something that is understood rationally for us, okay? So in other words, it makes sense to us that we are mortal, and because it makes sense to us that we are mortal, that means that we're going to extend ourselves to be better off by not living a shallow life, but facing life with courage as a means of being virtuous. So I think this is a good place to stop and to take into consideration what we're pointing out, and to then understand some of the basics of Stoicism and to take it from there. All right? So thank you. Bye-bye.